Hi guys, how is everybody doing? Welcome to our first lecture. Welcome to 21st Century Lit. This is your first lesson. This is your first video lecture. Welcome. I hope you guys are okay, staying safe, I hope. Okay. By the way, just so you would know, there are two parts in this video lecture. If I'm not mistaken, I mentioned to you last meeting about the 2020. So we're going to be doing that for the whole semester, actually for the whole year. 20 minutes of discussion for the video, then another 20 minutes for the other part of the video, with the same lecture though. So shall we start? Okay. Right, so you may be asking me, or I may be asking you, what is literature? Anybody? Of course you're not going to answer, or maybe you will. Do you have an idea, possibly? Miss, is it about books? Miss, is it something that we see in the library? Miss, is it something that's with words? Miss, is it something that's like Shakespeare? Yeah. If you thought of anything within that context of what I said, yes, that is literature. And loosely, if we're going to define it, literature is a body of written works. So anything that is written and published, are works of literature. So what is the objective for this lesson? We're going to compare and contrast 21st century literary genres and their elements and structures and traditions from across the globe. As I mentioned in the scope and sequence discussion in the subject orientation, we will be also focusing in the local sense wherein the Philippine literature scope will also be discussed. Now, if we're talking about 21st century lit, there are two main parts or two main categorizations of it. The first one would be chronological, and the second one would be thematic. If we break it down, chronological is exactly what it means. It has something to do with years, time frame, order, that kind of thing. New literary works created within the last decade is part of this scope or category. Written works by contemporary authors are part of 21st century lit. If we talk about contemporary authors, contemporary meaning current, so like John Green, David Levithan, who else? Dean Francis Alfar, if you're Janice Silang. These are the authors who are still writing as of current, and they are part of the 21st century literature, which we'll be discussing even more forward or towards the end of this lecture. Okay, on the other hand, when we talk about thematic, it deals with current themes or issues and reflects a technological culture. It often breaks traditional writing rules, and it caters to the needs of a 21st century reader. Now, you may be asking me, Miss, what is a 21st century reader? Well, I'm gonna tell you right now. A 21st century reader is somebody who grew up using technology as a primary learning tool. You may say that these types of people have been or have undergone some sort of dependency on technology. They're more focused on technology. They're not more of the analog. Obviously, if you're talking about digital, there is something called analog, which is basically manual everything. So people like you guys who are 21st century people, readers now, you grew up depending on technology ever since you were a kid. Possibly you already had a cell phone when you were younger, possibly not, but the idea that the cell phone was already there, the smartphone was already there, that concept was already alive during that time. And so you were already immersed in that culture wherein technology is very, very apparent and very, very in fashion, if that makes any sense. Since you guys are already digital natives, which are the people who grew up depending on digital technology, you guys are capable of navigating and interpreting digital formats and media messages in different platforms. Platforms being social media, it could also be websites, it could also be in any type of digital manifestation, if you will. So if that's a digital manifestation. So a 21st century reader also possesses literacy skills, which include technological abilities such as keyboarding, internet navigation, interpretation of technological speak, your internet slang, or your shortcuts, your lols, or you get what I'm saying, right? The ability to communicate and interpret coded language and decipher graphics. So you guys, as much as you are technologically dependent, you are also very visual based. You guys like seeing pictures, you guys like videos, you do TikTok. Back in the day, we had Vine, all of these things. You guys are very visual. So the 21st century reader possesses these skills or have developed these skills that I mentioned earlier. And so it's now an evolution from the 20th century reader to the 21st. In the 21st century lit, it is a reflection of issues and contexts situated in the current era. So everything that can and will be talked about in this particular decade or time, it may fall under the category of 21st century literature. And it would be very, very interesting for me to see and read and to know what are your thoughts about all of these contemporary issues, because it's very apparent that the voice of the youth right now is really needed. The voice of the youth is really needed, and so I'm very excited to know your thoughts and to hear your voice. So yeah. So we're talking about contemporary issues, yes? So it may fall under a lot of branches, it may fall under a lot of concepts. So with these concepts, we may touch upon these that are appearing on screen: resurrecting national cultures, the pandemic, online learning, mental health issues, plurality of truth, globalization, political unrest, COVID-19, lost traditions, and reimagining of the society. So we may touch upon these, if not all of these contemporary issues, along the way during our discussion in 21st century lit. So it is somewhat, how do you say, an eye-opener, because just like what I said in the subject orientation, like art imitates life and life imitates art here. So the idea of kind of merging art and life is what lit, 21st century lit, more specifically is all about. So that's pretty interesting and pretty fun. So we now move on to the literary genres to be discussed. So when we say literary genres, these are your classifications, or how you try to define or put into compartmentalize certain authors, certain books, into categories wherein it would be more understandable, or let's say not really understandable as you can't understand it, but more comprehensive, if that makes any sense. So few examples of literary genres are as follows. You have metafiction, doodle fiction, flash fiction, pop culture references, diaspora literature, advertisement stories, manga. Anybody who likes manga, right? Cool. Textula, dystopian, IM novels, illustrated novels, calligraphy, speculative literature, deconstructed literary texts, fan fiction, graphic novels, chick lit, and spoken word poetry, which is my favorite. So these are the genres that we'll be discussing. in part 2. So that would be the next video. If you're done with this one, please do immediately click to the second one so that your mind is still fresh from all of the information that you just got. So I'll see you in the next video. Yes? Okay. Thank you.